So my family has a history of beekeeping in it. I grew up, my mom raised me and we lived real near my grandmother. And so my grandmother always talked about her dad, my great-grandfather, Clarence Meyer, kept honeybees. And so a lot of our family stories revolved around honeybees, and it was one of my great-grandfather's favorite things. He loved to sit out and look at his bees, and he used to always make the joke that the only people, or the only thing that did any work around their homestead, their house, were the bees, because they're constantly working, bringing in nectar and creating honey. And so he thought a lot of their work ethic. Started with just family stories, that it was part of our family's history. I enjoyed hearing about the bees and the recipes that used honey, so it was something that I eventually decided to see if I could keep bees too. Moving bees can be done, but it's a little tricky, and so I wanted to have a settled place. I wanted to have a spot before I started getting bees. Also in grad school, I knew that I wasn't going to be able to pick where I was going to live, and so if I had gotten bees, even in South Carolina, bees adjust to local environments. And so had I had South Carolina bees and then tried to take them to Kentucky, it would have been difficult for them to survive through our winters here. So I wanted to make sure I was settled in a place I was likely to stay before I ended up truly beginning any beekeeping. So it's just been since I got to Kentucky that I started actually having bees. My first recommendation is to join a local bee club. We're part of the Green River Beekeeper Association. It covers our county, and so our local extension office has monthly meetings where you all can learn about bees, and you have this social club, the Green River Beekeepers, that will get you connections and potentially a mentor for keeping bees. And so when I first wanted to go about beekeeping, I went to a meeting. I didn't have any honeybees. I hadn't done anything, but I wanted to start going to this monthly meeting. I went, I asked questions, and I talked to some of the beekeepers. Ted Caldwell, who was one of the beekeepers who took me under his wing, he told me that I should keep coming to meetings and I should read Beekeeping for Dummies. At first, I was, hesitant. I was like, I don't want to read Beekeeper for Dummies. I want to just learn how to do it. I want to do it my own way. But after some reflection, after some thought, I went ahead and did it, and I bought the book. And so really those two things helped to set me up for success in my first year. Reading Beekeeper for Dummies, trying to learn everything about bees in a short amount of time is difficult if you're not reading, because you're learning so much about honeybee biology, but then also how to manipulate honeybee hives. Because you're really trying to understand what bees do, their biology, their reproductive cycle, and then how they operate during different parts of the year. So you have to get a grasp of all that, and then how as a beekeeper you manipulate and change that. And so the choices you make as a beekeeper affect how much honey is produced, what they do, whether or not they're going to survive through the winter. So reading Beekeeper for Dummies helped me to get up to speed a lot faster than I would have if I was trying to learn it all on my own. Our bee club president, so Michael is another one who took me under his wing in our bee club. And so he's helped to build our local chapter of our community beekeeping organization. He always recommends getting at least 2 hives, and I would also recommend that. So you've joined a club, you had connections, you will read more about beekeeping so you have a basis for it. And then you want to have multiple hives, because it is crazy how you could have 2 hives right next to one another that just act entirely different. If you only have 1 hive, then you might think it's normal, that that's just how bees act. But you could have the meanest hive ever that's real defensive and is stinging you all the time, and then that's not the way all bees are. And so if you have at least 2, you can compare and contrast. Like, is one growing real fast and is real successful and the other one's not? Is one real defensive and will sting you a whole lot versus the other one that doesn't? Because each hive has its own personality, and so you got to get a sense of how it is operating. And so as a new beekeeper, you want to have more than just one, so that you can get a sense of what different hives are like. But I started, so it was January 4 years ago. I went to my first bee club meeting. By March, I had 2 hives in my backyard. So that was how I got started. I was able to get both of those hives through the winter. They survived, and so I was successful at being a beekeeper, not just a bee haver. Because if you just have bees, they can die each year, and then you have to buy more bees. So keeping bees alive is one of the challenges that beekeepers face. So I think a lot of my success ended up being because I read Beekeeping for Dummies and I joined that club. So I think everybody should do that as well. There are restrictions against young beekeepers. As a undergrad student and as a grad student, one, I couldn't afford the equipment and the bees themselves, because it is and it can be an expensive hobby. It also takes some time, so retired people end up being more likely to do it. But I am encouraged that more and more of the younger generation seems interested in keeping bees, and so you do see occasional young beekeepers. As part of our bee club organization, the Green River Beekeepers, we even help out with a local 4-H group that has some honeybees, and they were able to harvest some honey last year, and so it's nice being able to see younger generations also get involved. I do hope it'll continue and that there will be a new generation that embraces it. For me, I think it's kind of fun to be the young beekeeper in the bee club, that I can help them with stuff. And I'm especially more comfortable with some technology than they are. And so I'm able to contribute even if I don't have as much experience keeping bees. So I kind of have my strengths and ways that I can help the bee club, even if I don't have the 30 years of experience beekeeping that some of my other members of this club do. So it kind of works out well that I can contribute and also learn from them. Honeybees, a lot of times there's a tendency to think about the individual bee. As a beekeeper, I think of it as a colony. It's almost like a superorganism, and so instead of focusing on an individual bee, you have to think of the colony as a whole thing. And so when I say that I have 2 hives, they're 2 different colonies of bees. Each colony of bees will have 1 queen, and so she is the mother of all the bees that are going to be within that beehive and within that colony. And then she's going to control everything about it, on how many new bees are going to be made, and she is really the motor of this whole hive. Her children, her daughters, the worker bees, are all the female bees. And then she will have some male bees that will be her kids as well. But these drones, the male bees, serve zero purpose other than reproduction. Each beehive colony will have a queen, they've got worker bees, and they'll have some drones. And then they have babies that they're raising, and they'll have honey and or nectar and pollen, so that's their food sources. So it's a big group of bees that will all work together. And so you've got a queen bee who's really the captain of that hive. They're the ship, they're steering the ship, they're doing everything. And so when I have two of them, I have two queens, two different groups, and they're just completely separate from one another. And so when I think of bees, I have like thousands and thousands of individual honeybees, but I think of them in terms of colonies. I've got 2 colonies of bees. Right now I've got 5 because they have grown in size, but each colony will have their own queen. And if they do not have a queen, they will either try to replace it, they'll try and create a new one, or they'll be hopelessly queenless and they will die out. Without a queen, the hive will not continue. And so they've got to keep that queen safe, they've got to keep her healthy, and so really that is the, if you're thinking about one individual in the hive that's the most important, it's the queen. Beekeeping is particularly challenging right now for a lot of different reasons. But the main one is there's this pest. It's an invasive species, just like bees are invasive to North America. But it's the varroa mite. And so it is a parasite that will bite the bees and really suck out their energy. And so it's going to lead to diseases and a much weaker colony. And so if you keep honeybees, you're also keeping varroa mites. They are everywhere. And so I started out with bees, and very quickly you start to see varroa mites, that they start to come. Honeybees, the ones that we keep in North America, are European honeybees. And so it's a specific type of bee. Varroa originated in Asiatic honeybees, and so then it jumped to European honeybees, and it has made its way around the world essentially. And so it's a vector for disease, it makes the hives weaker, and so that's one of the major challenges facing bees. And so you've got to have a pest management plan. You have to figure out what you're going to do as a beekeeper to try and test for and to check how bad the varroa numbers are. And so this pest is one of the big challenges that I face. The other major challenge that is happening around the United States is not so much my problem in Campbellsville. I'm very lucky that I have, where I keep honeybees is in town. And there's basically an all-you-can-eat buffet of food for the bees, that they have flowers almost any time of the year in the city. The rest of the United States, whether it's an urban center, so in cities, major cities, it's concrete. There's not always flowers for the bees to visit, and so they might not have proper nutrition. Sadly, our agriculture system is also really, really bad for bees. So if you drive around here in South Central Kentucky, you'll see acres and acres of corn or soybeans or other types of monocropped agriculture. And so it helps us to produce a whole lot of corn or a whole lot of beans or oil or whatever you're producing. But bees like a diverse diet. They want to visit a whole bunch of different types of things. And it's often not what we grow for ourselves. So it's not the corn, it's not the beans. And so the bees often don't thrive around agricultural lands. That they would do far better in the old style vegetable patch. And so me living in town in Campbellsville, lots of people have a backyard garden. I have one sitting right in front of my hives, and it's one of the reasons why I wanted to get into beekeeping is I'm a gardener. I like to have my vegetables from my own backyard garden. And during different times of the years, my bees are just all over, like squash flowers or pumpkin flowers. And so the bees really like a whole lot of that diverse type of flowers, pollen, and nectar, their food sources. And so one of the other major problems is between our agriculture system and our cities, there are fewer floral resources, there's fewer flowers for the bees. And so some beekeepers have major issues with just them not getting the proper nutrition that they need. And so diseases, pests, lack of flowers that will help them, all are major challenges that current beekeepers have. Varroa in particular, like you have to have some type of plan, and many of the beekeepers who have trouble keeping their bees alive, it's because they don't have a good pest management plan. Without bees, you wouldn't pollinate almost anything. Like the fact that we have almonds at all, that beekeepers, one way beekeepers can make more money is if they ship their bees to the harvest in California, and they help to pollinate different of our nut trees. So that people will end up shipping their beehives on giant, like semi-trucks out to California, and they help to pollinate. I saw this firsthand the first year I kept honeybees. So I got bees in the spring, so in March, and I planted my backyard garden like I always had. I planted watermelons. I was used to growing watermelons on the vine, and you get like 1 or 2 watermelons per vine. With me having bees right next to it, they pollinated like every flower. I had watermelons. I had over 200 pounds of watermelons that just from my little backyard garden, because they were so good at pollinating those flowers. And so a lot of the crops that we have, it's because the bees spreading the pollen. The honey that's produced, so bees need 2 things to feed themselves. They need pollen, so this is going to be one of their food resources, and it's what we're allergic to. So like when you have allergies breaking out, it's like a good time for the bees. And so it's like, I've got allergies right now, but my bees are loving it because they've got this food resource. So pollen is one of their food things that they need. The other is nectar. Nectar is coming from flowers, and then they dry that nectar out, and then it becomes honey. So they will use nectar immediately, or they dry it out to save it for later. And that's really what honey is, that they save nectar that they've dried out to a like a level that will preserve itself, that it doesn't need any type, it won't ferment, it won't go bad. And so it's the reason why honey is shelf stable. It can be used for hundreds and hundreds of years.